A widow is humiliated in an interview for taking her son, but the owner of the company was watching. The January rain in Portland had a way of seeping into your bones, but Ilara Monroe had long since learned to weather more than just the cold. Standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:45 a.m., she traced the dark circles under her honey-brown eyes, remnants of another night spent soothing Anthony's fever dreams. Her reflection told a story of resilience, caramel-brown skin that seemed to hold onto the last traces of summer, even in winter's grip, natural curves that spoke of motherhood's lasting embrace, and thick, curly hair pulled back into what she called her survival bun. Just another day, she whispered to herself, the words forming a small cloud in the chilly air of her modest apartment. The heating had been temperamental lately, another item on her endless list of things she couldn't quite afford to fix, but Anthony needed new winter boots, and her son's needs always came first. As if summoned by her thoughts, a small whimper echoed from the bedroom they shared. Ilara moved quietly through the dim apartment, her sock-covered feet silent on the worn hardwood floors. In his toddler bed, Anthony lay curled around his favorite blue hoodie, his light brown skin flushed with the lingering fever. "Hey, baby boy," she murmured, running her hand over his perfectly formed curls. His dark eyes fluttered open, immediately finding hers with that soul-deep recognition that never failed to catch her breath. At 2 years and 4 months, Anthony Isaiah Monroe carried himself with an old soul's quiet dignity, so much like his father that sometimes it made her heart ache. "Mama," he whispered, reaching up with small hands that still held the softness of babyhood. Ilara scooped him up, breathing in the sweet morning scent of him, letting his warm weight center her for what lay ahead. "We've got an adventure today, Tony," she told him, moving through their morning routine with practiced efficiency. "Mama's got a job interview, and you're going to be my brave little partner, okay?" Anthony watched her with those knowing eyes as she dressed him in warm layers, thermal undershirt, long-sleeved tee, and yes, the blue hoodie that had become his security blanket. She'd tried washing it once while he slept, only to face a meltdown of epic proportions when he woke. Now it went everywhere with them, a cotton blend shield against the world. The bus ride downtown was a lesson in invisible arithmetic, counting the dollars left on her transit card, the hours until Anthony's next meal, the minutes until the interview at Kane & Co. She'd seen the hiring notice online. Experienced barista wanted, competitive pay, benefits available. The benefits part had made her heart jump. Anthony's recent bout of ear infections had depleted their emergency fund, and the thought of having actual health insurance felt like a dream too dangerous to want. The Kane & Co. Cafe stood like a fortress of modern architecture among Portland's older buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows gleamed despite the rain, and even from outside, Ilara could smell the rich aroma of premium coffee. Anthony stirred against her shoulder, his small fingers clutching her coat as they entered. The interior was a study in industrial chic, exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and copper light fixtures that cast a warm glow over carefully arranged seating areas. Behind the counter, baristas in crisp black aprons moved with choreographed precision, their actions accompanied by the symphony of high-end espresso machines. "You must be joking." The voice cut through the ambient cafe noise like a blade. A woman in her 40s, wearing a manager's badge and an expression of thinly veiled disgust, stood before them. Her name tag read, "Patricia." "I'm here for the interview," Ilara said, straightening her spine while adjusting Anthony on her hip. "I'm Ilara Monroe. We spoke on the phone yesterday." "Yes, well, I wasn't aware you'd be bringing additional company." Patricia's eyes flicked to Anthony and then away, as if the sight of a child might somehow taint the cafe's carefully curated atmosphere. "This is highly unprofessional." Ilara felt the familiar heat of shame trying to climb up her neck, but she refused to let it show on her face. "I apologize for any inconvenience, but I'm a single mother, and my regular sitter is—" "This isn't a daycare center, Miss Monroe," Patricia interrupted, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby customers. "Kane & Co. maintains certain standards. If you can't arrange proper childcare for an interview, I can't imagine how you'd manage actual shifts." The words hit like slaps, each one calculated to sting. Around them the cafe had grown quieter, and Ilara could feel the weight of strangers' stares. Anthony pressed his face into her neck, sensing her tension, and she brought her hand up to cup the back of his head protectively. "I understand," Ilara said, proud that her voice remained steady. "Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, dignity wrapped around her like armor, when a voice, deep, firm, and somehow warm despite its authority, stopped her. "Actually, Patricia, I'd like to conduct this interview myself." The cafe fell silent enough to hear the rain against the windows. Ilara turned back to find herself looking up at a man who seemed to command the very air around him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his obvious authority with casual grace. Dark jeans and a charcoal button-down rolled up to reveal strong forearms. But it was his eyes that held her, crystalline blue and startlingly kind. "Mr. Kane, Patricia started, her face draining of color. "Thank you, Patricia. That will be all." His dismissal was polite but absolute. He turned those remarkable eyes back to Ilara, and something in his expression softened. "Ms. Monroe, would you follow me? And of course your son is welcome." Stephen Kane, because this had to be the Stephen Kane, founder of the entire chain, led them through the cafe to a corner table partially screened by a living wall of plants. He pulled out a chair for her, and Ilara sat, settling Anthony in her lap. The toddler, usually shy with strangers, watched Stephen with open curiosity. "First," Stephen said, sitting across from them, "I apologize for Patricia's behavior. It doesn't reflect our company's values." He smiled at Anthony, who was still studying him intently. "That's a very cool hoodie you've got there." Anthony's small fingers curled into the worn blue fabric, and for the first time that morning he smiled, a tiny, precious thing that made Ilara's heart squeeze. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for both the apology and the kindness to her son. "I know this isn't conventional, bringing him to an interview, but sometimes being a mother means making impossible choices seem possible." Something flickered in Stephen's eyes, recognition perhaps, or pain, but it was gone before she could name it. "Tell me about your experience, Ms. Monroe." "Ilara, please." She took a breath, settling into the conversation. "I worked as a lead barista at Coffee Culture for 3 years before her husband died, before her world collapsed, before single mother became her primary identity, before I took some time off for family reasons. I can make any drink you can name, handle a morning rush without breaking stride, and I learn new systems quickly." Stephen nodded, but his attention seemed equally divided between her words and Anthony, who had begun to relax against her chest, his eyes growing heavy. The fever was wearing him out. "He's not feeling well," Stephen asked softly. "Ear infection," Ilara admitted. "He's on antibiotics, but they make him tired." Stephen's expression changed subtly, concern deepening the blue of his eyes. Without a word, he signaled to a barista, who quickly brought over a small pot of hot water and a selection of teas. "Chamomile might help him rest," he suggested, then added with a slight smile, "I find it works wonders during board meetings too." The joke, delivered so casually, startled a laugh from Ilara. It felt foreign in her throat, rusty from disuse, but genuine. Anthony stirred at the sound, lifting his head to watch Stephen prepare the tea with the same precision she imagined he brought to everything in his life. "The position is yours," he said suddenly, sliding the cup of chamomile tea toward her. "If you want it. Full benefits from day one, flexible scheduling to accommodate childcare and—" He glanced at Anthony, who had reached out one small hand toward the rising steam. "We can discuss having a dedicated space for him here when needed." Ilara's hand froze halfway to the teacup. "Mr. Kane." "Stephen, please." "Stephen." His name felt weighted with something she couldn't name. That's not standard policy, is it?" "No," he admitted, meeting her eyes directly. "But I've learned that standard policies often fail to account for extraordinary people." The words hung between them, carried on the scent of chamomile and coffee, wrapped in the gentle music playing overhead and the continuing pattern of rain against glass. Anthony had finally surrendered to sleep, his warm weight both comfort and courage against her chest. "When can you start?" Stephen asked quietly, as if speaking any louder might shatter the moment. Ilara looked down at her sleeping son, then back at the man across the table, this unexpected ally who had turned what should have been her moment of defeat into something else entirely, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Tomorrow," she said, and watched as Stephen Kane smiled for the first time, a smile that transformed his entire face and sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Tomorrow it is," he agreed, and in that moment, with the rain falling soft outside and her son sleeping peacefully in her arms, Ilara felt something shift in the universe, as if all the scattered pieces of her life were finally ready to form a new picture. She just wasn't sure yet what that picture would be. Morning light filtered through the windows of Kane & Co., painting copper streaks across the polished counters as Ilara adjusted her new black apron. Her fingers traced the embroidered logo, simple, elegant letters in metallic thread that caught the light like promises. First days usually brought butterflies, but today felt different, heavier, more significant. "Remember what Mama said?" Ilara knelt before Anthony, who stood clutching his blue hoodie in the small office Stephen had converted into a temporary play area. The space, though hastily arranged, showed careful thought. Soft floor mats, a small table with crayons and paper, and a comfortable child-sized beanbag that Anthony was eyeing with cautious interest. "Be brave," Anthony whispered, his dark eyes serious. At barely 2, he already carried himself with a gravity that sometimes made her heart ache. Like Daddy. Ilara's breath caught. They didn't often talk about Michael, her late husband, but Anthony had begun asking questions lately. Simple ones, wrapped in toddler logic, but each one felt like pressing on a bruise that refused to heal. "That's right, baby. Just like Daddy. He'll be fine." The voice, now familiar despite having heard it only yesterday, made Ilara stand and turn. Stephen stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small space without overwhelming it. Today he wore a light blue button-down that made his eyes seem impossibly clearer, sleeves rolled up, as if ready to tackle whatever the day might bring. "I had some books delivered," he continued, gesturing to a small shelf she hadn't noticed before. "The reviews said they're appropriate for his age group." He paused, something like uncertainty flickering across his features. "I hope that's okay." The gesture, so thoughtful and yet so cautious, touched something in Ilara she'd thought long dormant. That's very kind of you." "Kind has nothing to do with it," Stephen replied, but his smile softened the words. "Happy employees make better coffee. Simple business logic." But there was nothing simple about the way he looked at Anthony, who had gravitated toward the bookshelf with newfound curiosity. Nothing businesslike in the gentle way he knelt down to Anthony's level, maintaining a respectful distance while pointing out a particularly colorful cover. "This one's about a little boy who builds a rocket ship from cardboard boxes," Stephen explained, his deep voice pitched soft and warm. "What do you think, Anthony? Would you like to explore space today?" Anthony looked up at Ilara, seeking permission in that way he always did, before trying something new. At her encouraging nod, he took a tentative step toward Stephen and the books. "Space," he repeated carefully, testing the word. "I'll check on him every 15 minutes, Stephen assured Ilara, standing but keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "And you can look in whenever you need to. The security camera feeds directly to the monitor behind the counter." Ilara wanted to protest that he didn't need to do this himself. Surely the owner of a successful coffee chain had more important things to do than babysit, but something in his expression stopped her. There was an eagerness there, carefully contained but visible to her searching gaze. "Thank you," she said instead, and watched as Anthony settled into the beanbag, already entranced by the book Stephen had shown him. It was the most comfortable she'd seen him with a stranger since Michael. The morning rush hit like a tidal wave, Portland's professionals seeking their caffeine fix with the desperate energy of people who needed to be somewhere 10 minutes ago. But Ilara found her rhythm quickly, muscle memory taking over as she crafted drink after drink. The high-end equipment was a joy to work with, responding to her touch with precision that made every beverage feel like a small work of art. Between customers, her eyes kept straying to the security monitor. She'd see Anthony listening intently as Stephen read to him, or coloring with focused determination, or even napping peacefully in the beanbag. Every 15 minutes, exactly as promised, Stephen would check on him, sometimes bringing water or a healthy snack that Ilara knew hadn't been there yesterday. "He's good with kids." The comment came from Lily, another barista who'd been quietly showing Ilara the ropes. She had kind eyes and a sleeve of vibrant tattoos that seemed to dance as she worked the espresso machine. "I've never seen Mr. Kane like this," Lily continued, keeping her voice low. "He usually stays in his office upstairs, watches everything through the cameras, sure, but..." She gestured toward the monitor, where Stephen was carefully covering a sleeping Anthony with a small blanket. "This is different." Ilara's chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. "He's just being considerate." "Honey," Lily said with a knowing smile, "Stephen Kane built this company from nothing into 30 locations across 3 states. He doesn't do anything just anything." The morning rush faded into the quieter lull of late morning, and Ilara took the opportunity to check on Anthony in person. She found him awake and engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with Stephen about the merits of different colored crayons. "Blue best?" Anthony was insisting, holding up his favorite crayon with solemn conviction. "A compelling argument," Stephen replied with equal gravity, though his eyes danced with suppressed amusement. "But have you considered the versatility of green? Trees, grass, dragons." "Blue dragons," Anthony countered, and Stephen laughed, a rich, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. He looked up at Ilara's approach, and something in his expression made her pulse skip. "Your son is a master negotiator," he said, standing and brushing off his knees. "He's convinced me that all dragons should be blue from now on. He has that effect on people." Ilara smiled, watching as Anthony returned to his artistic endeavors. "Mr. Kane." "Stephen," he corrected gently. "Stephen," she amended, lowering her voice. "You don't have to spend your day here. I'm sure you have more important things to do." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on Anthony with an intensity that seemed to hold worlds of unspoken thoughts. "Sometimes the most important things aren't the ones on our calendar," he finally said. Then, as if catching himself in an unguarded moment, he added more briskly, "Besides, I'm reviewing our new coffee suppliers. This is as good a place as any to work." But Ilara had seen something in that unguarded moment, a flash of longing, perhaps, or loss. It reminded her of the way she sometimes caught her own reflection when Anthony did something that echoed his father. The rest of the day fell into a pattern. Ilara would serve customers, steal glances at the monitor, and occasionally check on Anthony in person. Stephen would alternate between actually reviewing business documents and engaging Anthony in increasingly elaborate conversations about everything from dinosaurs to the proper way to build block towers. As closing time approached, Ilara found herself moving slower than necessary, reluctant to break the spell of this strange, perfect day. Anthony had fallen asleep again, clutching both his blue hoodie and one of the new books Stephen had bought. "He can keep it," Stephen said quietly, noticing her attempt to separate book from child. "All of them, actually. They'll be here whenever he is." "I can't accept—" "You can," he interrupted, but gently. "Consider it part of your benefits package." His attempt at maintaining professional distance would have been more convincing if he wasn't carefully tucking the blanket around Anthony's shoulders. Ilara studied him in the fading light, this successful, powerful man who had spent his day making her son feel safe and valued, who had turned what could have been a humiliating situation into something that felt almost like home. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Why do all this?" Stephen straightened, and in the golden hour light streaming through the windows, he looked almost vulnerable. "Because everyone deserves a chance to rebuild," he said softly. "Because sometimes the things we think we can't have are the only things worth wanting." He cleared his throat, professional mask sliding back into place. "And because you make excellent cappuccinos, which makes you an asset worth accommodating." But Ilara had seen it, that moment of raw honesty that matched the ache in her own heart. As she gathered a sleeping Anthony into her arms, she felt the weight of possibility settling around her shoulders. Not just for herself, but for her son, who had spoken more words today than in the past week. For Stephen, whose carefully maintained distance seemed to crack a little more each time Anthony smiled at him. "Same time tomorrow?" Stephen asked, holding the door open for them. "Same time tomorrow," Ilara confirmed, and stepped out into the evening air carrying her sleeping son, and the strange, warm feeling that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't finished with her story after all. 3 weeks into her new job at Kane & Coas, Ilara found herself watching the rain through the cafe's windows, lost in thought. The morning rush hadn't started yet, and the pre-dawn quiet held a kind of magic that made her mind wander. She'd arrived early today, unable to sleep, memories of Michael playing through her mind like old film reels. It would have been his birthday. "You're here early." Stephen's voice pulled her from her reverie. He stood in the soft darkness of the cafe, coat slightly damp from the rain, looking less like a successful business owner and more like a man who'd also been chasing sleep without success. The shadows under his eyes matched her own. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, continuing to prep the espresso machines. Anthony was restless too, almost like he knew. She trailed off, but Stephen's quiet "ah" told her he'd understood. Over the past weeks, he'd developed an uncanny ability to read between her lines, to hear the words she couldn't bring herself to say. "He's still sleeping," she added, gesturing to the security monitor, showing Anthony curled up in his now favorite beanbag, blue hoodie serving as both pillow and blanket. The office had evolved into a proper children's corner, with more books, educational toys, and even a small white noise machine that Stephen had noticed helped Anthony sleep better. "Children sense more than we think," Stephen said softly, moving behind the counter with practiced ease. He began making coffee, not with the automated machines, but with the pour-over setup he preferred during quiet moments. His movements were precise, almost meditative. "My sister used to say that babies are born with old souls, and it takes years for the world to make them forget." It was the first time he'd mentioned any family, and something in his tone made Alara look up from the pastry case she was arranging. "Used to say?" A muscle twitched in Stephen's jaw. "She passed 10 years ago." He focused intently on the coffee, watching the water spiral through the grounds. "Car accident. She was 24. Ilara's heart clenched. "I'm sorry. Thank you." He poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward her. "It's strange, isn't it? How grief becomes part of your DNA. Some days you barely notice it, and others. It feels like walking through water," Ilara finished, accepting the coffee. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she tried to ignore the warmth that sparked from that simple contact. "Everything is harder, heavier." Stephen nodded, leaning against the counter in a way that made him seem less like her boss and more like something she wasn't ready to name. "Tell me about him," he asked quietly, "if you want to." The question caught her off guard. Most people avoided the subject of Michael, uncertain how to navigate the waters of her widowhood. But Stephen's eyes held only genuine interest, and maybe something like recognition, the look of someone who understood that sometimes talking about the lost was the only way to keep breathing. "He was a teacher," she began, surprising herself. "Middle school science. The kind who did crazy experiments that sometimes set off the fire alarms, but made kids fall in love with learning." A smile tugged at her lips, despite the ache in her chest. "That's how we met, actually. I was catering a school function, and he knocked over an entire tray of cookies trying to demonstrate centripetal force with a paper plate." Stephen's laugh was soft, encouraging. "Smooth." "He thought so." Ilara grinned, the memory warming her. "Insisted on replacing them himself. Showed up at my workplace the next day with 3 dozen homemade cookies that were absolutely terrible. But his smile." She took a sip of coffee, letting the rich flavor ground her. "I never stood a chance." "Anthony has his smile," Stephen observed gently. "I've noticed it when he's particularly proud of something." The fact that he'd noticed such a detail, that he'd paid enough attention to her son to recognize echoes of Michael in him, made Ilara's throat tight. "Yes, he does." The pre-dawn quiet wrapped around them like a cocoon, broken only by the soft hum of machines warming up and the distant sound of rain. Stephen seemed to be weighing something in his mind, his long fingers tracing patterns on his coffee cup. "I can't have children," he said suddenly, the words falling between them like stones in still water. "Found out years ago. It's why my last relationship ended." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Among other things." Ilara's heart stuttered, not from the confession itself, but from the raw vulnerability in his voice, the kind that came from sharing a truth you'd buried so deep. Speaking it felt like excavation. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. "That must have been difficult to hear." It was. Stephen's eyes found hers, holding something that looked like gratitude. "Still is some days. But lately..." He glanced at the monitor showing Anthony, his expression softening. "Lately I'm learning there are different ways to matter in someone's life." The weight of that statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to voice. Ilara found herself holding her breath, aware that they were standing on the edge of something that both thrilled and terrified her. The moment was broken by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Lily arriving for her morning shift. Stephen straightened, professional mask sliding back into place, but his eyes lingered on Ilara's face for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The morning rush began in earnest, but something had shifted. Ilara felt it in the way Stephen's hand brushed her shoulder as he passed, in the soft looks he gave Anthony when he thought no one was watching, in the careful distance he maintained that somehow felt more intimate than closeness. During her break, she found Anthony and Stephen engaged in what had become their morning ritual, storytelling. But today's story was different. "And the brave knight," Stephen was saying, his deep voice gentle, "knew that sometimes the biggest adventures aren't about fighting dragons or saving kingdoms. Sometimes they're about having the courage to build something new from the pieces of what was lost." Anthony sat in Stephen's lap, a development that had happened gradually over the weeks, each day bringing them closer until it seemed the most natural thing in the world. He clutched his ever-present blue hoodie, eyes wide with attention. "Build new?" Anthony asked, his small hand reaching up to touch Stephen's cheek with the innocent boldness of toddlers. "Like Mama's coffee house?" Stephen's eyes met Ilara's over Anthony's head, and the look in them made her breath catch. "Yes," he said softly, still holding her gaze, "exactly like that." Throughout the day, Ilara found herself watching their interactions through new eyes. She saw how Stephen unconsciously matched his stride to Anthony's toddling steps, how he'd developed a sixth sense for when Anthony was about to get overtired, how he'd learned to interpret Anthony's quieter forms of communication in a way few others had managed. It wasn't just kindness or obligation. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race and her hands shake when she let herself think about it too long. As closing time approached, Stephen appeared with Anthony in his arms, both of them wearing identical expressions of accomplishment. "We may have conducted a small science experiment," Stephen admitted, trying and failing to hide his smile. Anthony proudly held up a paper cup where coffee grounds and water had been used to grow small beans. "Garden," he announced, beaming with Michael's smile. "He insisted on using the premium Brazilian roast," Stephen added, looking both apologetic and entirely too pleased with himself. "Said it would grow better coffee trees." Ilara laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. The weight of the morning's grief hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, making room for something else, something that felt dangerously like possibility. You know," Stephen said as he helped her gather their things, his voice carefully casual, "there's a Children's Science Museum exhibit opening this weekend, all about growing things. Anthony might enjoy it." The invitation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Ilara looked at her son, still clutching his coffee ground garden, then at Stephen, who watched her with that mixture of hope and uncertainty she was beginning to recognize in herself. "He might," she agreed softly, and watched as Stephen's entire face lit up with a smile that made her heart forget its careful rhythms. Later that night, as she tucked Anthony into bed, he asked her something that made her world tilt on its axis. "Mama," he whispered, serious as only a toddler could be, "Mr. Steve sad like you. Missing people." Ilara pressed a kiss to his forehead, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. "Yes, baby," she murmured. "I think he is." "We fix," Anthony declared with simple certainty, clutching his blue hoodie. "Like coffee garden." Ilara lay awake long after Anthony had fallen asleep, thinking about loss and growth, about coffee gardens and careful distances, about the way grief could carve spaces in you that might someday be filled with something new, something that felt like hope. The Portland Children's Science Museum buzzed with weekend energy, but all Ilara could focus on was the way Stephen's hand hovered near her lower back as he guided them through the crowds. Not touching, never touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him like a promise. "Look, Tony," Stephen pointed to an interactive display about plant growth, "just like our coffee garden." His voice carried that subtle excitement she'd come to recognize, the tone he used when sharing something new with Anthony. Anthony, perched on her hip, was uncharacteristically quiet, his fingers twisted in his blue hoodie, dark eyes taking in the chaos of children and exhibits with obvious uncertainty. The fever he'd fought off weeks ago had returned last night, mild, but enough to make him clingy. "Maybe this wasn't the best timing," Ilara murmured, feeling his forehead for what felt like the 100th time that morning. "We could try again next weekend. Or we could try something else," Stephen suggested, his eyes scanning the space before landing on a door marked Special Collections. He pulled out his phone, typed briefly, then smiled. Being the donor of their new wing has some advantages. Come on. He led them through the door into a quiet hallway, then into a room that made both Alara and Anthony gasp. The ceiling was a perfect recreation of the night sky, stars twinkling realistically above them. Interactive constellations hung at child height, and soft music played from hidden speakers. "Better?" Stephen asked softly. Anthony nodded, already reaching toward a glowing display of the moon phases. "Stars," he whispered, wonder replacing discomfort in his expression. They spent the next hour in their private planetarium, Anthony gradually warming up enough to explore, while Stephen explained the constellations in terms a toddler could grasp. Ilara found herself watching them more than the stars, the way Stephen naturally adjusted his pace to Anthony's, how he seemed to anticipate which displays would interest him most. "And that one," Stephen was saying, pointing to a cluster of stars, "is Ursa Minor, the little bear. Some people call it the Little Dipper." "Bear?" Anthony's eyes widened with interest. "Like story?" "Exactly like the story we read." Stephen grinned, referring to one of the many books that had mysteriously appeared in Anthony's corner at the cafe. "Want to hear the real story behind this constellation?" Anthony nodded eagerly, and to Ilara's surprise he reached for Stephen's hand. Stephen froze for a fraction of a second, emotion flickering across his face too quickly to name, before carefully accepting the small fingers in his own. "Well," he began, voice slightly rough, "a long time ago there was a mother bear who loved her cub so much that Zeus himself, that's like a very powerful king, turned them both into stars so they could stay together forever." Anthony considered this seriously. "Mama bear?" He looked at Ilara, making the connection in his toddler way. "Yes," Stephen said softly, his eyes meeting Ilara's over Anthony's head. "A mama bear who would do anything for her baby." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things, until Anthony tugged on Stephen's hand. "More stars?" They moved through the exhibit slowly, Anthony growing increasingly comfortable with both the space and with Stephen. When he started yawning, Stephen smoothly lifted him up, and Anthony settled against his chest like he belonged there. "I can take him," Ilara offered, even as her heart twisted at the sight. "He's perfect where he is," Stephen murmured, and something in his tone made her chest tight. "Unless, does it bother you?" The question carried weight beyond the simple act of holding a sleepy toddler. Ilara studied them. Her son, who trusted so few people since losing his father, curled trustingly against this man who looked at him like he was something precious. "No," she said honestly, "it doesn't bother me at all." Stephen's smile was worth any uncertainty she might have felt. They ended up in the museum's quiet cafe, Anthony napping against Stephen's chest while they shared a plate of mediocre cookies that made them both laugh, remembering Ilara's story about Michael's baking disaster. "He would have loved this place," Ilara said softly, surprising herself. "Michael, I mean. He was always looking for new ways to make science accessible to kids." Stephen's free hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough that she could feel the intention. "Tell me more." And she did. For the first time since Michael's death, she found herself sharing stories that made her smile instead of cry, about his failed experiments, his terrible jokes, the way he'd sing off-key to make his students laugh. "He sounds like an amazing father," Stephen said when she finished, his hand unconsciously rubbing circles on Anthony's back. He was. Ilara watched the gentle motion of his hand, thinking about how natural he looked with her son. "You are too, you know, in your way." Stephen's hand stilled. "Ilara, Ms. Monroe?" The voice cut through their bubble like a knife. Patricia, the manager who had tried to humiliate Ilara during her interview, stood at their table with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought that was you. Shopping on your day off?" Her gaze flicked to Stephen, then to Anthony sleeping in his arms, and something calculating entered her expression. "How cozy." Ilara felt her cheeks warm even as her spine stiffened. "Patricia, yes, we were just enjoying the new astronomy exhibit," Stephen cut in, his voice carrying that quiet authority she'd first heard in the cafe. "The one funded by Kane & Cora's educational initiative. I trust you received the memo about our company's commitment to supporting working parents." Patricia's smile faltered. "Of course, Mr. Kane. I just wanted to ensure everything was appropriate. I appreciate your concern, Stephen said in a tone that suggested he didn't appreciate it at all, though I'm curious why you're monitoring our employees' personal time. The dismissal was clear. Patricia retreated, but the damage was done. The easy intimacy of the morning had shattered, replaced by the awkward reality of their situation. He was her boss, and people were already talking. I should get Anthony home, Ilara said, standing perhaps too quickly. His fever might be coming back. Ilara, wait. Stephen stood carefully, still cradling Anthony. Don't let her. She's right, though, isn't she? Ilara kept her voice low, conscious of her sleeping son. This isn't. We can't. Can't what? Stephen challenged softly. Care about each other? Build something real? You're my boss. I'm a man who... He stopped, adjusting Anthony's weight as the toddler stirred. A man who cares about you. Both of you. More than I probably should. The admission hung between them, honest and terrifying. Ilara looked at him, really looked at him, at the way he held her son like something precious, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at all the careful distance he maintained, except when it came to Anthony's happiness. I can't risk this job, she whispered. Anthony needs stability, health insurance. I would never let anything compromise that, Stephen promised. But Ilara, please don't use it as an excuse to run from whatever this is becoming. Anthony chose that moment to wake, blinking sleepily at them both. Home? He asked, but made no move to leave Stephen's arms. Yes, baby, Ilara said, reaching for him. Time to go home. The transfer from Stephen's arms to hers felt symbolic somehow, a physical manifestation of the walls she was trying to rebuild. But Anthony had other ideas. Mr. Steve come? He asked, looking between them with Michael's eyes. Read Star's story. Ilara's heart clenched at the hope in his voice, at the way Stephen's expression cracked with naked longing before he carefully smoothed it away. Not today, buddy, Stephen said gently. But I'll see you tomorrow at the cafe, okay? We can read any story you want. Anthony's lower lip trembled. Promise? I promise. Stephen's voice was firm, his eyes on Ilara even as he spoke to Anthony. I'm not going anywhere. The drive home was quiet, Anthony falling back asleep almost immediately. Ilara's mind raced with everything that had happened, the perfect morning, Patricia's interruption, the way Stephen had looked at her when he said he cared about them. Later that night, after tucking Anthony into bed, she found herself staring at their reflection in his bedroom window. Her son slept peacefully, clutching his blue hoodie, and the astronomy book Stephen had quietly slipped into their bag before they left. On his nightstand, the coffee garden they'd grown together was sprouting its first tiny green leaf. Growth, Ilara thought, watching the rain paint patterns on the glass. It was always painful at first, but sometimes, if you were brave enough to let it happen, it could lead to something beautiful. The storm hit Portland without warning, turning the afternoon sky an ominous shade of green. Wind rattled the windows of Kane & Co. As Ilara wiped down the counter, trying to ignore the way her phone kept buzzing in her pocket. 3 missed calls from her apartment building's management, each more urgent than the last. Bad leak in your unit, the latest voicemail had said. Need immediate access. Water damage spreading to neighboring apartments. She glanced at the security monitor showing Anthony's corner. Her son was currently engaged in what had become his favorite activity, helping Stephen with paperwork. In practice, this meant Anthony sat in Stephen's lap, solemnly marking random documents with his crayons, while Stephen somehow managed to actually work around him. The sight made her heart twist. In the week since their museum visit, she'd tried to maintain professional distance, but Stephen had made it difficult, not through any overt actions, but through 1,000 small kindnesses that were harder to resist than grand gestures, like now, as he appeared beside her with a concerned frown. Everything okay? You've checked your phone 6 times in the last hour. It's nothing, she started, but thunder cracked overhead with perfect dramatic timing, making her jump. Just apartment issues. A leak. They need to access my unit, but I can't leave early, and my neighbor who usually helps is out of town. Stephen's expression shifted from concern to decision in an instant. Go, take care of it. I can't just... You can. His voice was firm but gentle. Your shift is covered. Anthony can stay in my office until you're done. We're in the middle of a very important business meeting involving dinosaur stickers. As if to prove his point, Anthony's voice drifted over. Blue T-Rex best. Ilara bit her lip, torn between responsibility and necessity. I shouldn't... Ilara. Stephen stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Let me help, please. It was the please that undid her, the way his voice caught on it, like he needed this as much as she did. She nodded, and his smile was worth every moment of uncertainty. The storm had turned the streets into rivers by the time she reached her apartment building. The super led her to her unit, where water stained the ceiling in ominous patterns and dripped steadily onto furniture she couldn't afford to replace. 2 hours and countless phone calls later, Ilara stood in her bedroom, staring at the soaked mattress and waterlogged belongings. The leak had been fixed, but the damage assessment was clear. The unit wouldn't be habitable for at least a week while repairs were made. Her phone buzzed. Stephen. How bad is it? He asked without preamble. Ilara sank onto the one dry chair, exhaustion hitting her all at once. Bad, we can't stay here. Water damage, possible mold. The building's insurance will cover repairs, but they can't start until tomorrow, and it'll take at least a week. Where will you stay? I'll figure something out. She tried to keep her voice steady. Maybe a motel or... No. The word was soft, but absolute. Pack what you need for the week. I'm sending you an address. Stephen, I have a guest house, he continued, his tone brooking no argument. Separate entrance, fully furnished, never used. It's yours for as long as you need it. I can't accept. You can, he interrupted gently. You will. Because Anthony is currently explaining to me in great detail why dragons need rain boots during storms, and I think this conversation needs to continue somewhere dry and safe. As if to emphasize his point, Anthony's voice came through the phone. Purple boots, Mr. Steve, for jumping. Despite everything, Ilara laughed. He's okay? He's perfect. Stephen's voice softened. He misses you, though. We both do. The simple honesty of it made her throat tight. Text me the address, she said finally. But Stephen, this is temporary, just until I figure something else out. Of course, he agreed too quickly. Just temporary. The address he sent led her to a neighborhood of elegant homes set back from tree-lined streets. Stephen's house, because of course it was his personal residence, was surprisingly modest compared to its neighbors, modern but welcoming, with warm lights glowing against the darkening sky. The guest house stood separate from the main building, connected by a covered walkway. Stephen waited for her there, holding an umbrella despite the covered path. Always prepared, always thinking ahead. Anthony's asleep in the main house, he said as she approached, rain-soaked and uncertain. I thought you might want to get settled first, see the space. He trailed off, and Ilara realized he was nervous. Stephen Kane, successful business owner and usually unflappable presence, was fidgeting with the umbrella handle. The guest house was beautiful, all clean lines and comfortable furniture, with a fully stocked kitchen and 2 bedrooms. The smaller one had already been set up with a toddler bed identical to Anthony's at home. When did you... Ilara gestured to the bed, emotion making it hard to speak. I called in a favor. Stephen ran a hand through his hair, a rare tell of uncertainty. Was it too much? I can have it removed. It's perfect, she whispered, and watched as relief softened his features. Thunder rolled overhead, and Stephen glanced toward the main house. I should get Anthony. He's not fond of storms. I know, Ilara smiled despite herself. That's why we have the purple rain boots, for jumping in puddles when we're scared. Stephen's expression changed, something like wonder crossing his face. You're amazing, you know that. The words hung between them, too honest for either to take back. Ilara felt her pulse quicken as Stephen took a step closer, then another, until she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. Ilara, he breathed, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. A cry from the main house broke the moment. Anthony, likely woken by the storm. They both moved at once, parental instincts overriding everything else. They found him in Stephen's study, clutching his blue hoodie and looking small among the leather furniture and dark wood panels. But the moment he saw them both, his face lit up with such pure joy that Ilara felt tears prick her eyes. Mama! Mr. Steve! He reached for them both, and somehow they ended up on the leather couch, Anthony between them, as Stephen quietly read from the astronomy book that had become Anthony's favorite. The stars are still there, Stephen explained as thunder shook the windows, even when we can't see them through the storms. Anthony considered this, his small hand finding Ilara's. Like Daddy? The question hit her like a physical blow. Stephen's reading faltered for just a moment before he answered with gentle certainty, exactly like Daddy, always watching over you, even when you can't see him. Ilara met his eyes over Anthony's head, seeing in them an understanding that broke her heart and healed it in the same moment. This man, who couldn't have children of his own, somehow knew exactly what her son needed to hear. Later, after Anthony had fallen asleep in his new bed, clutching both his hoodie and the rocket ship pillow that had mysteriously appeared, Ilara found Stephen in the kitchen of the main house, making tea. "I should head back to the guest house," she said, but made no move to leave. "Probably," he agreed, sliding a cup toward her. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away. "This is complicated," she whispered. "Life usually is." He moved closer, slowly enough that she could step away if she wanted to. She didn't. "But some things are worth the complexity." The storm raged outside, but in that kitchen, with the scent of tea and rain in the air, Ilara felt something shift inside her, like tectonic plates finally settling into their true alignment. "I'm not ready," she admitted, but she let him take her hand. "I know." His thumb traced patterns on her palm. "We have time." A crash of thunder made them both glance toward the guest house, but the monitor on the counter showed Anthony sleeping peacefully, surrounded by his growing collection of books and toys that Stephen pretended not to buy. "He loves you," Ilara said softly. "I've never seen him take to anyone like this, not since—" "I love him too." Stephen's voice was rough with emotion. "And I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I'll wait, for however long you need. We can be whatever you're ready for us to be." Ilara looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who read stories about stars to her son, who understood about purple rain boots and coffee gardens, who offered shelter without demanding anything in return. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed a kiss to his cheek, feeling him freeze at the contact. "Thank you," she whispered against his skin, then stepped back before either of them could do something they weren't ready for. She left him standing in his kitchen, touching his cheek where her lips had been. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, and as she walked the short distance to the guest house, Ilara thought about storms, how they could destroy, yes, but also how they could clear the air, make way for new growth, like the coffee garden on Anthony's windowsill, now sprouting its second leaf, like her heart, slowly learning to trust again, like love, growing in the spaces between fear and hope, between what was and what could be, simple, complicated, temporary, eternal, all of it swirling together like cream in coffee, creating something entirely new. Living in Stephen's guest house was an exercise in constant awareness. Awareness of his proximity just across the garden, of the way Anthony lit up every morning knowing Mr. Steve was just steps away, of how domestic it felt when they'd crossed paths in the early hours. Stephen heading to the cafe, Ilara preparing Anthony's breakfast. It had been 5 days since the storm, and Ilara was starting to forget what it felt like to not have Stephen woven into the fabric of their daily life. "Coffee's ready," he called from his kitchen, where she'd started joining him for their pre-work ritual. Anthony sat at the counter, happily munching on the whole-grain waffles Stephen had somehow known to stock. "More, please?" Anthony held up his plate, his smile a mirror of Michael's that made her heart squeeze. "What do we say?" Stephen prompted gently, already reaching for the waffle maker. "More, please, thank you." Anthony's manners had improved dramatically under Stephen's patient guidance. Ilara watched them, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest. Stephen moved around his kitchen with easy grace, dressed for work in charcoal slacks and a blue button-down that made his eyes look like summer sky. He'd rolled up his sleeves to cook, and she found herself following the movement of his forearms as he poured batter into the waffle maker. "You're staring," he murmured as he passed her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and warm, like cedar and coffee. "You're cooking," she countered, accepting the coffee he offered. "In a 3-piece suit." "2-piece. The vest is optional." His smile was playful, but his eyes held something deeper when they met hers. "And I like cooking for my family." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Before Ilara could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from her building manager. "Repairs are delayed," she said, scanning the message. "At least another week before we can move back." She expected disappointment or frustration to flood her at the news. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to relief. "Stay," Stephen said quietly, his attention seemingly focused on perfecting Anthony's waffle. "As long as you need." "Steve." The nickname slipped out before she could catch it. His head snapped up, eyes darkening at the informal address. "Yes?" His voice was rough, and she watched his knuckles whiten on the counter's edge. "Done," Anthony announced, breaking the moment. He held up his empty plate proudly. "Work now? Help Mr. Steve?" It had become their routine, Anthony helping at the cafe, which really meant spending mornings in his special corner while Stephen and Ilara worked. But today was different. "Actually, buddy," Stephen said, kneeling to Anthony's level, "I have a surprise. Remember Miss Lily from the cafe? She has a daughter your age, and they're going to the children's center today. Would you like to go play?" Anthony's eyes widened. He looked at Ilara, seeking permission and reassurance. "Mama, too?" "Mama has to work," Stephen explained gently, "but I arranged for you to have a play date. Make some friends your age, and we'll all have dinner together after, okay?" Ilara felt her throat tighten at the careful way he'd planned this, how he'd thought about Anthony's need for socialization with peers. It was the kind of thing Michael would have done, putting their son's development first. "You didn't have to do that," she said later, after Anthony had left with an excited Lily and her daughter Winter. "I wanted to." Stephen's hand found the small of her back as they walked into the cafe, not quite touching but close enough to feel the heat of him. "He needs friends his age, and..." He hesitated. "We need to talk." Fear flickered through her chest. "About?" But before he could answer, Patricia's voice cut through the morning quiet. "Mr. Kane, the board members are here. Early." Stephen's expression shifted, professional mask sliding into place. "They weren't supposed to arrive until next week." "Emergency meeting," Patricia said, her eyes sliding to Ilara with poorly concealed satisfaction, "about certain concerns that have been raised." The implications were clear in her tone. Ilara felt her cheeks burn as she moved behind the counter, trying to look busy and uninvolved. "My office." Stephen's voice was cold in a way she'd never heard. "Now." The morning passed in a blur of tension. Through the security monitor, Ilara could see figures moving in Stephen's office. Serious-looking men and women in expensive suits. Their voices sometimes carried through the closed door, words like inappropriate and liability making her stomach churn. Around noon, the board members filed out. One of them, an elegant woman with steel-grey hair, paused at the counter. "Vanilla latte," she ordered, studying Ilara with uncomfortably sharp eyes. "You're her, then?" Ilara straightened her spine. "I'm the barista, yes." The woman's lips curved slightly. "You know, I've known Stephen since he was in college. Never seen him fight for anything the way he fought for you today." She accepted her latte with a nod. "Don't waste it." Before Ilara could respond, the woman was gone, leaving her with more questions than answers. Stephen emerged from his office looking exhausted but somehow lighter. He made his way to the counter, accepting the coffee Ilara had waiting for him. "We need to talk," he said again, but this time his voice held something like hope. "Dinner? After we pick up Anthony?" The rest of the day crawled by. Ilara's mind raced with possibilities, with fears and hopes she didn't dare name. When they finally picked up Anthony from the children's center, he was bubbling with excitement about his new friend Winter and their adventures. "And we painted," he announced over dinner, which Stephen had arranged in his kitchen rather than the guest house. "Blue flowers for Mama." "That's beautiful, baby," Ilara smiled, watching as he fought to keep his eyes open between bites. The big day had worn him out. "I think someone's ready for bed," Stephen observed softly. "Want me to take him over?" Ilara nodded, watching as Stephen scooped up a sleepy Anthony with practiced ease. Her son immediately curled into him, small fingers clutching Stephen's shirt as they disappeared toward the guest house. When Stephen returned, he was carrying 2 glasses of wine and an expression that made her pulse quicken. "They tried to force me to end it," he said without preamble, setting the glasses down. "The board. They said having a relationship with an employee was inappropriate, a liability." Ilara's heart sank. "Stephen, so I stepped down as CEO." The words hung in the air between them. Ilara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You what?" "I'm still the majority shareholder," he continued, moving closer. Still on the board, but I'm no longer your boss. I appointed Diane, the woman who ordered the latte, as CEO. She's more qualified anyway, been running operations for years while I played at being in charge. You can't just... Ilara shook her head, trying to process. Your company is just a company. His hand found her face, thumb brushing her cheek with aching tenderness. This, what we're building here, this is everything. Steve, she whispered, and felt him shudder at the nickname. I love him, he said roughly. Anthony, I love him like he's my own. And you? His forehead pressed against hers. You're in every cup of coffee I make, every story I read, every moment of every day. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I needed you to know that I choose this. I choose you both. Ilara felt tears slip down her cheeks. It's too much. You're giving up too much. I'm not giving up anything. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer. I'm gaining everything. The kiss, when it finally came, tasted like coffee and truth and possibility. His lips were soft against hers, careful, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she wound her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. They broke apart at the sound of small feet on hardwood. Anthony stood in the doorway, clutching his blue hoodie and rubbing his eyes. Bad dream, he mumbled, and they both moved toward him instinctively. Want to tell us about it? Stephen asked, lifting him up as Ilara stroked his curls. Anthony shook his head, burrowing into Stephen's chest. Stay? Both stay? Ilara met Stephen's eyes over their son's head. And yes, she realized, that's what Anthony had become to him, their son. The thought should have terrified her, should have sent her running. Instead, it felt like coming home. We'll stay, she promised, and watched Stephen's eyes fill with tears as Anthony reached for her hand. They ended up on Stephen's couch, Anthony sleeping between them while a soft rain began to fall outside. Like that first night of the storm, but different now. Better. I love you, Stephen whispered into the quiet, his hand finding hers over Anthony's sleeping form. Both of you. So much it terrifies me. Ilara squeezed his hand, watching their joined fingers rise and fall with Anthony's peaceful breathing. I'm not ready to say it back, she admitted. Not yet. But, she met his eyes in the dim light, I'm ready to try, to build something new. His smile was worth every moment of fear, every careful step that had led them here. That's all I need, he murmured, and she knew it was true. Knew that this man, who had given up power and position just to love them properly, would wait forever if that's what she needed. But looking at him now, at the way he cradled their sleeping son while holding her hand like it was something precious, Ilara didn't think she'd need forever. Just time, just trust, just the courage to let love grow, one moment at a time, like a coffee garden reaching toward the light. Dawn painted Stephen's kitchen in shades of gold, but Ilara barely noticed the sunrise. She was too focused on the small box in her hands, a box she'd pulled from the depths of her belongings while packing to return to her apartment, now finally repaired after 2 weeks. Inside lay Michael's wedding ring, still on its chain, still carrying the weight of promises and memories. Mama? Anthony's voice drew her attention. He stood in the doorway of Stephen's kitchen, blue hoodie twisted in his small hands. Sad? No, baby. She smiled, though her eyes felt damp. Just remembering. Anthony padded over in his rocket ship pajamas, another gift from Stephen, and climbed into her lap. His small fingers reached for the ring, touching it with surprising gentleness. Daddy's? He asked, and Ilara's heart clenched at how much understanding lived in those dark eyes. Yes, sweetheart. Daddy's ring. Keep it safe? Anthony's question held layers of meaning that someone so young shouldn't have to understand. Always, she promised, pressing a kiss to his curls. We'll always keep Daddy in our hearts. And Mr. Steve, too? The innocent question hung in the air just as Stephen appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day but frozen at Anthony's words. Their eyes met over their son's head, and Ilara saw her own complex emotions reflected in Stephen's face. Mr. Steve has his own special place, she said carefully, watching Stephen's expression soften. Different from Daddy's, but just as important. Anthony seemed satisfied with this answer, sliding off her lap to greet Stephen with his usual enthusiasm. Morning. Waffles? Of course, buddy. Stephen scooped him up, but his eyes never left Ilara's. Why don't you help me mix the batter? Ilara watched them work together, their movements choreographed by weeks of shared mornings. Stephen had learned all of Anthony's little preferences, the way he liked his waffles cut into precise triangles, how he needed his juice in the blue cup with the rocket ships. "Found something?" Stephen asked softly, when Anthony was occupied with his breakfast. Ilara held up the chain with Michael's ring, was going through boxes deciding what to pack. Understanding dawned in Stephen's eyes. Right. The move back. The return to normal life. Away from this bubble they'd created in his home. Away from shared breakfasts and bedtime stories and the quiet moments that had begun to feel like forever. "You don't have to," he started. "We need to," she interrupted gently. "You know we do." He nodded, but she saw the shadow cross his face. "At least let me help you move, and maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe we could talk about what comes next. For us." The question carried weight, like clouds heavy with rain. Before she could respond, Anthony's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Steve sad too?" he asked, abandoning his waffles to pat Stephen's hand with sticky fingers. Stephen caught those small fingers in his own, pressing a kiss to them that made Ilara's heart twist. "No, buddy. Just thinking about how much I'll miss our breakfast talks." "Still see you," Anthony said with the simple certainty of children. "Still family." The word hung between them like a prayer. Stephen's eyes met Ilara's, full of questions he wouldn't ask, hopes he was trying not to hold too tightly. "Still family," Ilara confirmed softly, and watched as something in Stephen's expression broke open with joy. Later that morning, as they packed boxes in the guest house, Stephen broached the subject again. "Move in with me," he said suddenly, setting down a box of Anthony's books, which had somehow multiplied during their stay. "Steve, not here. Not if you're not ready." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd come to love. "I have another property. A house not far from Anthony's preschool, 3 bedrooms, big yard, space for a garden. It needs some work, but—" He took a breath. "It could be ours. Something we build together." Ilara sat on the edge of the bed, Michael's ring still heavy in her pocket. "It's too soon." "Is it?" He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I've loved you both since that first day in the cafe. Since Anthony looked at me with Michael's eyes, and you stood there with all that quiet strength. I know it's complicated. I know there's history and memory and grief, but Ilara—" His thumbs traced patterns on her palms. "Life is short. Michael taught you that. My sister taught me that. Sometimes love is the only thing worth rushing into." "I'd have to sell my apartment," she said, surprising herself. Hope flickered in Stephen's eyes. "Yes. Anthony would need time to adjust." "Of course. And I'd want to contribute, pay my share." Stephen's lips quirked. "I assumed you'd insist on that. And—" She pulled Michael's ring from her pocket. "This comes with us, somewhere Anthony can see it, remember him." "We'll build a special shelf," Stephen said immediately, "in Anthony's room, for the ring and pictures and anything else that helps him keep his father's memory alive." Tears spilled down Ilara's cheeks. "You're impossible, you know that." "I'm in love," he corrected, reaching up to brush away her tears. "With you, with our son, with the life we could build together. Our son." The words echoed in her heart, fitting perfectly into spaces she thought would stay empty forever. "Show me," she whispered. "The house?" "Everything." They spent the afternoon exploring the property Stephen had mentioned, a craftsman-style home with good bones and better potential. Anthony ran through empty rooms, his excitement filling the space with life and possibility. "Blue room," he declared, standing in what would be his bedroom. "Like sky." "We can do that," Stephen agreed, watching as Anthony explored the window seat. "And maybe build some bookshelves for all your stories?" "And Daddy's special shelf?" Anthony asked, showing that uncanny perception that sometimes took Ilara's breath away. "Right here," Stephen said softly, indicating a sunny corner, "where you can see it every morning. Remember all the love that brought you here." Ilara watched them from the doorway, her heart so full it hurt. Stephen had already planned everything, not just the practical details, but the emotional ones, the way to honor Michael's memory while building something new. Later, after Anthony had fallen asleep in the car ride home, exhausted from exploring their potential future, Ilara finally voiced the fear that had been growing all day. "What if I'm not ready?" she whispered, as Stephen drove through the quiet streets. "What if I never am?" He was quiet for a moment, streetlights painting his profile in golden shadow. "Then we wait," he said simply. "We take it slow. Keep the guest house arrangement, or find something else that works. I'm not going anywhere, Ilara. Whether it takes weeks or months or years, I'll be here." She reached across the console to take his hand, remembering another car ride 2 years ago when her world had shattered with a single phone call about Michael. "I can't lose anyone else," she admitted, the words barely audible. Stephen brought their joined hands to his lips. "Then I'll just have to stick around. All of us. Together." In the back seat, Anthony stirred just enough to mumble, "Family." And sitting there, holding Stephen's hand while their son slept peacefully behind them, Ilara felt something settle in her soul, like puzzle pieces clicking into place, like the first sip of perfect coffee, like coming home after a long journey. "Yes," she said, squeezing Stephen's hand. "Show me the paperwork tomorrow for the house." His smile lit up the darkness, brighter than any streetlight. "Really? Really?" She looked back at Anthony, then at their joined hands. "It's time to build something new. Together." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, but Ilara's mind was full of possibilities. Blue rooms and garden plans, shared meals and bedtime stories, a shelf for Michael's memory, and space for new love to grow. It wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations, moments of doubt, days when grief would feel heavier than hope. But looking at Stephen's profile in the dim light, feeling the solid warmth of his hand in hers, Ilara knew one thing with absolute certainty. Some loves were worth the risk. Some families were meant to grow. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply say yes to joy. The real estate agent's heels clicked against the hardwood floors of Ilara's apartment as she made notes on her tablet. "The market's hot right now," she explained, gesturing to the view of Portland's skyline. "We should be able to sell quickly, especially in this location." Ilara nodded, trying to focus on the conversation, while watching Anthony through the doorway. He sat in his room, methodically sorting his belongings into new house and memory piles, a system Stephen had suggested to help him process the move. The memory pile centered around items connected to Michael, old photos, the first book they'd read together, tiny things that held pieces of his father's story. "Mama," Anthony called, holding up a worn baseball cap. "Where'd this go?" Ilara's throat tightened. Michael's Portland Timbers cap, the one he'd worn to every home game. "What do you think, baby?" Anthony studied the cap with serious eyes, then carefully placed it in the memory pile. "For special shelf," he decided. "But," he looked up at her with Michael's eyes, "can Mr. Steve take us to games too?" The real estate agent tactfully stepped into the other room, leaving Ilara to kneel beside her son. "Would you like that? Going to games with Steve?" Anthony nodded. "Different than with Daddy." "But good different." He said it like a question, seeking permission to want this new thing. "Good different is perfect," Ilara assured him, pulling him close. "We can make new memories while keeping the old ones safe." "Like coffee garden," Anthony said wisely, referring to the thriving plant that had become a symbol of their growing family. Old seeds, new flowers. Sometimes her son's perception stole her breath. Later that evening, as they walked through their potential new home with the contractor, Ilara watched Stephen with Anthony. They were discussing the backyard, where Stephen had sketched plans for a playground that could grow with Anthony, starting with age-appropriate equipment but designed to evolve into a space for older kids. "And here," Stephen was saying, pointing to a sunny corner, "we could build a greenhouse for coffee gardens and science experiments." Anthony's eyes lit up. "Like Daddy's class?" Instead of tensing at the mention of Michael, Stephen smiled. "Exactly. Your dad was a science teacher, right? Maybe we could make it a special place for learning, just like his classroom." Ilara's heart squeezed as Anthony threw his arms around Stephen's legs. "Best daddy too," he declared, and the room went very still. Stephen's eyes met Ilara's over Anthony's head, full of emotion he was trying to contain. "Buddy," he said carefully, "you know I'm not trying to replace your dad, right?" Anthony pulled back just enough to fix Stephen with that old soul stare. "Know that. Daddy in heart." He patted his chest, then reached up for Stephen to lift him. "You in heart too, different spaces, like Mama said." The contractor suddenly became very interested in his phone, stepping away to give them privacy. Stephen lifted Anthony, his movements slightly shaky. "Different spaces," he repeated softly, pressing a kiss to Anthony's curls. Thank you, buddy. Ilara moved to them, wrapping her arms around them both. Okay, she whispered against Stephen's shoulder. He nodded, too overcome to speak. They stood there in the empty room that would become their home, holding each other while sunshine painted patterns on the floors through dust-covered windows. The moment was broken by Stephen's phone buzzing. His expression changed as he read the message, a furrow appearing between his brows. Everything okay? Ilara asked as he set Anthony down. Board meeting tomorrow. He tried to smile, but she saw the tension in his jaw. Just some concerns about the direction of the company since I stepped down. Steve, she touched his arm. If you need to go back, no. His voice was firm. The company's in good hands with Diane. This is just growing pains. But later that night, after they'd returned to their temporary arrangement at his house and Anthony was asleep, Ilara found Stephen in his study, surrounded by financial reports. Talk to me, she said, perching on the edge of his desk. He rubbed his face, looking tired. The board's nervous. Stock's down since I stepped back. There's talk of selling to a larger corporation. What would that mean? Best case, nothing changes except ownership. Worst case, he sighed. They could strip the company for parts, close underperforming locations, lay off staff. Ilara's stomach clenched, thinking of Lily and the other employees who'd become like family. Can they do that without your approval? I'm majority shareholder, but if enough board members align against me... He trailed off, then reached for her hand. I'm sorry. This isn't your problem. Hey, she squeezed his fingers. Family, remember, your problems are our problems. His smile was worth every moment of uncertainty she'd pushed through to get here. Speaking of family, he pulled a small box from his desk drawer. I got something for Anthony, for the special shelf. Inside was a beautiful wooden frame, clearly custom-made. The left side held a photo of Michael in his coaching uniform, smiling that sunshine smile Anthony had inherited. The right side was empty. I thought, Stephen said carefully, maybe we could put a current photo on the right. Show him that love grows doesn't divide, that he's allowed to have both. Ilara stared at the frame, at the thoughtful way it honored both past and present. You're incredible. You know that? I just want to do right by him, by both of you. She set the frame down and turned to face him fully. You are, even with all this... She gestured to the financial reports. You're thinking about what Anthony needs, what I need. Always. He stood, pulling her close. You're my priority now. Both of you. Then let us help. She touched his cheek, feeling the slight stubble there. You don't have to handle everything alone anymore. His laugh was soft against her hair. Says the woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders for 2 years. Maybe we're both learning. They stayed like that for a moment, holding each other in the quiet of his study. Through the window, Ilara could see the guest house where Anthony slept, where they'd first begun to build this delicate, beautiful thing between them. Move in here, Stephen said suddenly, while the new house is being renovated. No more guest house, no more separate spaces. Let's do this properly. Ilara pulled back enough to see his face. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. His eyes held hers, serious and loving. I know we said we'd take it slow, and we can still do that. But Ilara, his hands framed her face, I want to wake up every morning knowing you're both here. Want to help Anthony get ready for school, want to make breakfast together, want all the small moments that make a family real. It won't be easy, she warned, even as her heart raced. Anthony has nightmares sometimes about losing people. Then we'll be there to hold him, together. The press might talk about us, about the company. Let them, he smiled. I've got something better to focus on. The board will either support my vision for ethical business practices and employee care, or they won't. His thumb traced her cheekbone. But I won't sacrifice this family for corporate profits. Not ever. Ilara studied him in the soft lamplight. This man who'd reorganized his entire life to love them properly, who thought about special shelves and growing playgrounds, who held her son's heart as carefully as he held her own. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's move in, all the way in. She smiled at his obvious joy. But Steve, the frame needs one more thing. What's that? A space in the middle, for a family photo, all of us together. His kiss tasted like gratitude and coffee and promises. They stayed there, wrapped in each other and possibilities, until a small voice called from the doorway. Mama? Mr. Steve? They turned to find Anthony clutching his blue hoodie. eyes heavy with sleep. Without discussion, they both moved to him, creating a safe space in their embrace. "Bad dream?" Stephen asked softly. Anthony shook his head. "Good dream. About new house and coffee garden and," he yawned, "family." "Want to sleep in the big bed tonight?" Ilara offered, sharing a look with Stephen. "All of us together?" Anthony's smile was answer enough. As they settled into Stephen's bed, their son between them like a bridge connecting past and future, Ilara felt pieces clicking into place. Tomorrow there would be meetings and decisions, packing boxes and signing papers, all the complicated details of merging lives. But tonight, in this quiet room with the two people she loved most in the world, everything felt simple. Love was love. Family was family. And sometimes, the bravest thing you could do was let your heart build a home in more than one place. The headline blazed across Stephen's tablet screen. Kane and Cohen in crisis. Former CEO's personal life impacts stock values. Below it, someone had managed to capture a photo of Stephen with Anthony on his shoulders at a recent Portland Timbers game, Ilara walking beside them, their happiness obvious even in the grainy distance shot. "Ignore it," Ilara said, setting his coffee down with more force than necessary. They were in the kitchen of what was now their shared home, Anthony still sleeping upstairs in what had become their new normal over the past 2 weeks. The stock dropped 12 points. Stephen's voice was tight. "The board meeting's in an hour. And you'll handle it like you handle everything." She moved behind him, pressing a kiss to his temple. "With grace and that terrifying intelligence of yours." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You loved us," she said simply. "The right way, the brave way." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the thunder of small feet on the stairs. Anthony appeared in his favorite rocket ship pajamas, curls wild from sleep. "School today?" he asked hopefully. They'd been visiting his potential new preschool, and he'd fallen in love with the science-focused curriculum and the friendly teachers. "Soon, buddy." Stephen's smile softened the worry lines around his eyes. "Just waiting on some paperwork." The truth was more complicated. The preschool's tuition was considerable, and while Stephen could easily afford it, Ilara insisted on contributing her share to all family expenses. It was one of the things he loved about her, that fierce independence, that determination to be a full partner in their life together. But with the company's future uncertain, with rumors of hostile takeovers and mass layoffs swirling, neither of them wanted to make major financial commitments. "Pancakes?" Anthony's request pulled them both from their thoughts. "Coming right up." Stephen stood, pressing a quick kiss to Ilara's lips before moving to the stove. "Want to help me mix the batter?" Their domestic rhythm was interrupted by Stephen's phone buzzing. Diane's name flashed on the screen. "Take it," Ilara said, already moving to take over pancake duty. "We've got this." Stephen's voice drifted from his study, too low to make out words, but tense enough to make Ilara's chest tight. Anthony, perceptive as always, caught her mood. "Mr. Steve worried?" he asked, carefully stirring the batter she'd placed in front of him. "A little, baby, but it's going to be okay. Because we help?" Anthony's expression was so earnest it made her heart ache. "Family helps." "That's right." She kissed his curls, breathing in the sweet morning scent of him. "Family helps." Stephen emerged from his study looking grim. "They've called an emergency shareholder meeting. Today. After the board meeting. That's not good, is it?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was trying to find the right words. "There's a proposal. To sell to Riverside Corporate. They're offering well above market value." Ilara's stomach dropped. Riverside was known for aggressive acquisitions and even more aggressive restructuring, a polite term for gutting companies and laying off workers. "They can't do that without your approval, right? You're majority shareholder. They're trying to force a vote of no confidence. If they succeed..." He trailed off, eyes landing on Anthony, who was now completely focused on his pancake art. "I could lose everything, the company, the benefits, all of it." "Hey," Ilara moved to him, taking his face in her hands. "Look at me. You won't lose us. Ever. Whatever happens with the company, we'll figure it out together." His hands covered hers, holding on like she was his anchor in a storm. "I can't let them destroy what we built. Not just us, but all of it. The employee benefits, the family-friendly policies, the community programs." Then fight. She held his gaze. Fight smart, fight hard, but fight for what matters. Anthony's voice broke their intense moment. Pancake ready. They turned to find him proudly holding up a misshapen pancake that vaguely resembled a star, or maybe a cat. It was hard to tell. Perfect, Stephen declared, and Ilara watched the tension ease from his shoulders as he lifted Anthony to examine his creation. Absolutely perfect. After breakfast, as Stephen prepared to leave for the meetings, Anthony tugged on his suit jacket. "Come back?" he asked, and the simple question carried the weight of every loss he'd ever experienced. Stephen knelt, straightening Anthony's perpetually crooked collar with gentle hands. "Always, buddy. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Promise?" "I promise." Stephen's voice was firm. "And you know what else? I was thinking maybe this weekend we could start building that greenhouse we talked about, for all our science experiments." Anthony's eyes lit up. "Like Daddy's class?" "Exactly like that." Stephen glanced at Ilara, including her in the moment. "Maybe we could even invite some of your new school friends over when it's done. Start a little science club." The pure joy on Anthony's face was worth every uncertainty they faced. He threw his arms around Stephen's neck, and Ilara heard Stephen's breath catch at the fierce little embrace. "Best daddy," Anthony whispered, and this time no one tensed at the words. They felt right, earned, chosen. Later, after Stephen had left and Anthony was occupied with his morning cartoons, Ilara found herself in their bedroom, staring at the family photo they'd recently added to Anthony's special shelf. Michael's smiling face on the left, a current photo of the three of them on the right, and in the middle, just as she'd suggested, a shot of all of them together at a recent park day, Anthony between them on a swing, 3 smiles bright in the sunshine. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "News isn't good. Board members arriving with lawyers." Ilara's hands shook as she replied, "Keep me posted?" She spent the morning trying to maintain normalcy for Anthony, while her phone buzzed with updates from Lily and other cafe employees. Each message made her anxiety spike. Corporate suits everywhere. "Diane looks worried." Someone mentioned restructuring. Stephen's holding his ground, but around noon her phone rang. "Stephen." "How bad?" she asked without preamble. "Bad." His voice was tight. "They're voting this afternoon. I need—" He took a shaky breath. "I need you here. Both of you, if you can. We're on our way." She dressed Anthony quickly, explaining they were going to support Steve at work. Her son, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation, was unusually quiet as they drove to the corporate offices. The main conference room was thick with tension when they arrived. Stephen stood at the head of the table, surrounded by board members and lawyers, but his entire being lightened when he saw them. "Mr. Kane," one of the lawyers started, "this is highly irregular. This," Stephen's voice cut through the room, "is my family, and they stay." He lifted Anthony into his arms, pressing a kiss to Ilara's temple before turning back to the board. "Now, let's talk about what really matters. Not profit margins or stock prices, but people, community, the values this company was built on." Ilara watched him speak, their son secure in his arms, and felt something settle in her chest. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, as a family, as a unit, as something stronger than any corporate takeover could break. Anthony's small hand found hers, squeezing with surprising strength, and she squeezed back, both of them holding on to what mattered most, each other, their love, their chosen family, built from loss and hope and the courage to try again. The storm might be gathering, but they had weathered worse. They would weather this, too, together. "Sometimes," Stephen's voice carried through the conference room, steady despite the tension crackling in the air, "we forget what truly builds a company. It's not stock prices or profit margins. It's people, community, the kind of values that can't be quantified on a spreadsheet." Anthony sat in Ilara's lap, unusually still, his small fingers clutching his ever-present blue hoodie as he watched Stephen command the room. Board members and lawyers shifted uncomfortably under the weight of Stephen's quiet conviction. "When I stepped down as CEO," Stephen continued, "it wasn't just about following my heart." His eyes found Ilara's, drawing strength from her presence. "It was about living our company's values, about showing our employees that family matters, that love matters." "Noble sentiments," Russell Matthews, the Riverside corporate representative, cut in smoothly, "but sentiment doesn't pay shareholders." "No," Stephen's smile held an edge. Let's talk numbers then. He pressed a button, and the screen behind him filled with data. Since implementing our family-first policies, paid parental leave, flexible scheduling, on-site childcare, employee retention has increased by 60%. Training costs have dropped. Productivity is up. More slides appeared, showing community engagement metrics, customer loyalty statistics, long-term growth projections. But most importantly, Stephen's voice softened as he looked at Anthony. We've created something real, something that matters. Ask any of our employees, your employees, Russell interrupted, who you've made dependent on unsustainable benefits. My employees, a new voice rang out, who would walk through fire for this company because Stephen Kane taught us what real leadership looks like. Lily stood in the doorway, still in her cane-and-cumber apron, holding a tablet. Behind her, a crowd had gathered, employees from every level of the company, many still in their work uniforms. We took a vote, Lily announced, stepping forward to hand her tablet to Diane. Every employee, every location, we're willing to take a temporary pay cut if it means keeping the company independent, keeping our benefits, keeping our family. Murmurs rippled through the board members as Diane reviewed the data. Stephen stood very still, emotion clear on his face as he looked at his employees, his people, who had shown up to fight for the soul of their company. Anthony squirmed in Ilara's lap. Help, Mr. Steve, he whispered. You already are, baby, she assured him. Just by being here. Diane cleared her throat. The employee vote is nearly unanimous, and I have something else to add. She produced a folder. Projections for our new community-based expansion model. Small locations, locally staffed with profit-sharing programs for employees. The pilot program in Seattle is already showing remarkable results. This is all very touching, Russell said, though his confidence had visibly wavered. But the shareholders are right here, called a familiar voice. The elegant older woman who had ordered vanilla lattes from Ilara stood up. And speaking as someone who's held Kane & Koba stock since Stephen was in college, I can tell you this. What makes this company valuable isn't its assets. It's its heart. One by one, other shareholders began to speak up. They talked about long-term stability over short-term gains, about corporate responsibility, about the value of being part of something meaningful. Stephen moved to stand behind Ilara's chair, one hand on her shoulder, the other reaching down to touch Anthony's curls. Their son looked up at him with complete trust, and Ilara felt Stephen's fingers tighten on her shoulder. I propose a new vote, Diane announced. Not on selling the company, but on recommitting to our core values. On making Stephen's vision, all of it, including the family-first policies and community focus, permanently part of our corporate charter. Russell started to object, but the room had already shifted. Board members were nodding, shareholders were sitting straighter, and the employees lining the walls stood proud and united. The vote was swift and decisive. When it was done, when Russell had stormed out and congratulations were being shared, Anthony tugged on Stephen's sleeve. We won? He asked seriously. Stephen lifted him up, pressing their foreheads together in a gesture that had become their special connection. We won, buddy, all of us together. Family strong, Anthony declared, and the simple wisdom of it made several board members wipe their eyes. Later that evening, after the excitement had died down and they'd celebrated with the cafe staff, they stood together in the backyard of their new home. The greenhouse was half-built, its framework reaching toward the darkening sky like a promise. Sorry about your stock portfolio, Ilara teased gently, watching Anthony arrange his science materials on the small workbench Stephen had built him. Worth it. Stephen pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Besides, I think we're about to revolutionize the coffee industry with our community-based model. Diane's already talking expansion. And that's what you want even after stepping down? What I want, he turned her to face him, is right here, this family, this life we're building. The company is important, but it's not everything. Mama, Daddy! Anthony's call, so natural now, so right, drew their attention. Look! They moved to where he stood proudly by his workbench. There, in a neat row, sat 3 coffee gardens. The original one they'd grown together, now flourishing, and 2 new seedlings just breaking through the soil. Family, Anthony explained, pointing to each plant. Big love, little loves, growing together. Ilara felt tears spill down her cheeks as Stephen knelt beside their son. That's beautiful, buddy. Did you know plants in the same family help each other grow stronger? Anthony nodded solemnly. Like us. And Daddy in heaven. All helping grow love. Stephen's eyes met Ilara's over their son's head, full of emotion that mirrored her own. This child, who had lost so much, who had taught them both about the capacity of hearts to expand, to heal, to love in new ways while honoring old loves. Speaking of family, Stephen said carefully, reaching into his pocket, I've been wanting to ask you both something. Ilara's breath caught as he withdrew a small box. Inside lay 3 rings, one clearly an engagement ring, but the other 2, family rings, Stephen explained, his voice rough with emotion. One for each of us. Because this isn't just about me and you, Ilara. It's about all of us, building something together. Anthony touched the smallest ring with wonder. Like Daddy's ring on special shelf? Similar but different, Stephen said. Your Daddy's ring represents the love that brought you into this world. These rings represent the love that's helping us build something new. Both are important. Both are real. Ilara knelt beside them, heart so full it hurt. What do you think, baby? Should we make it official? Become a forever family? Anthony looked at the rings, then at his coffee gardens, then at them both. With the simple clarity of children, he took the smallest ring and slipped it on his finger. Already forever, he said. Rings just show everybody else. Stephen laughed even as tears spilled down his cheeks. Smart kid we've got here. Brilliant, Ilara agreed, letting him slide the engagement ring onto her finger. It caught the last light of day, sparkling like promises. Later that night, after Anthony was asleep in his new room, the special shelf watching over him, holding both old memories and new ones, Ilara and Stephen stood in their greenhouse. The frame was incomplete, but already it felt like a sanctuary. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For loving us the right way. For making space for Michael's memory while building new memories. For understanding that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. He tilted her face up to his. Thank you for being brave enough to try again. For teaching me that family isn't about biology. It's about choice. About showing up every day and choosing each other. Their kiss tasted like coffee and promises. Like growth and grace. Like love that had learned to bloom in unexpected places. Through the greenhouse framework, stars twinkled above them. The same stars Stephen had taught Anthony about. The same stars that watched over all kinds of love, all kinds of families, all kinds of growth. And there, in their unfinished sanctuary, surrounded by the framework of dreams yet to be realized, they held each other and breathed in the truth they'd learned. That sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about first loves or perfect matches. They're about second chances and brave hearts. About children who teach us to love bigger, fuller, braver. About families built from choice and courage and the simple, profound decision to grow together. Like coffee gardens, reaching toward the light. Like hearts learning to bloom again. Like love, always love, finding new ways to flourish. 1 year later, the greenhouse sparkled with morning light, its glass walls creating prisms that danced across the flourishing plants within. Anthony, now almost 4, stood on his special step stool, carefully measuring water for the coffee gardens that had multiplied into a small forest. Remember what Daddy Steve taught us? Ilara asked, watching him work with the precision that reminded her so much of both his fathers. Michael's curiosity and Stephen's attention to detail somehow perfectly merged in their son. Different plants, different water, Anthony recited, his blue science apron a birthday gift from Stephen, covered in proud dirt stains. Like different love, different ways to show it. Ilara smiled, touching her wedding ring, a simple band that matched the ones Stephen and Anthony wore, their family rings, as Anthony called them. The engagement ring sparkled beside it, but it was the matching bands that meant the most to all of them. Ready for the big presentation? She asked, helping him gather his materials. Anthony nodded solemnly. His preschool science fair was today, and he'd chosen to present his coffee garden project, complete with careful drawings of each growth stage and a thorough explanation of how families, like plants, could grow in different ways. Daddy coming? He asked, meaning Stephen. He'd taken to calling him just Daddy a few months ago, while references to Michael had naturally evolved to Daddy in heaven, a distinction Anthony had created himself. Of course, he's probably already there setting up your display table. Indeed, When they arrived at the preschool, they found Stephen in his element, arranging Anthony's project materials with the same care he once used for corporate presentations. He'd taken a step back from daily operations at Kane & Co., focusing on their new community-based expansion model while Diane handled CEO duties. The change had given him more time for moments like this: school events, family dinners, weekend science experiments. "There's my scientist," Stephen beamed as Anthony ran to him. He caught him in a practiced swing, their matching grins bright enough to light up the room. "Ready to show everyone what you learned?" "Coffee Garden helps people understand," Anthony explained, straightening his bow tie, another matching touch he'd insisted on sharing with Stephen today. About different ways to grow love. Other parents were arriving, setting up their own children's projects, but more than a few stopped to watch Anthony's presentation practice. He'd become something of a legend at the school, the little boy who could explain photosynthesis to 4-year-olds and make them understand, who turned every science lesson into a story about family and growth. And these, Anthony pointed to his row of thriving plants, show how love grows bigger. Original Plant, he indicated the first coffee garden they'd ever grown together, now strong and tall, made new plants. Like original love makes new love, all connected. Ilara felt Stephen's arm slip around her waist as they watched their son confidently explain his project to the gathering crowd. On Anthony's display board, alongside his careful drawings and scientific notes, sat the 3-part frame that still held pride of place on his special shelf. Michael smiling on the left, their new family photo on the right, and in the middle, a shot from their small, intimate wedding in the greenhouse 3 months ago, Anthony standing between them, all three wearing not just matching rings, but matching smiles. "He's going to win," Stephen murmured proudly. "It's not about winning," Ilara reminded him, even as she glowed with equal pride. "Tell that to our son who created a full statistical analysis of plant growth rates." "Wonder where he gets that from, Mr. Spreadsheet?" Their playful banter was interrupted by Anthony's teacher, calling everyone to attention. As the science fair officially began, Anthony took his place behind his display with the quiet confidence that marked everything he did. "Love you," he whispered to both of them, before turning to greet his first visitors. "Love you more," they whispered back in unison, their practiced response making him smile even as he launched into his presentation. Later that evening, after Anthony had indeed won first place, because science and heart together are unbeatable, according to the judges, they celebrated in their greenhouse. The space had become the heart of their home, part laboratory, part sanctuary, part growing testament to the family they'd built together. "Special shelf needs new picture," Anthony declared, carefully placing his blue ribbon next to his project journal. "Which one?" Stephen asked, though they all knew he'd already ordered a custom frame for the science fair photos. "All of us, with Coffee Garden family." Anthony gestured to his flourishing plants. "Show how everything grows together." Ilara looked at their son, this amazing child who had taught them so much about love's capacity to expand, to adapt, to grow in new directions while keeping its roots strong, who had somehow known, even at his youngest, that hearts were made to hold more than one kind of love. "I think that's perfect," she said, reaching for both her boys. Everything together. Stephen's arms wrapped around them both, and for a moment they stood in the gentle evening light, surrounded by the lives they'd grown, plants and love and family, all flourishing together. Through the greenhouse glass, the first stars were appearing, the same stars that had watched over their first date, their first home, their wedding, the same stars that Anthony said helped Daddy Michael watch over them. "Happy?" Anthony asked, looking up at them both with those wise eyes that held echoes of every love that had shaped him. "So happy," Stephen assured him, pressing a kiss to his curls. "More than happy," Ilara added, holding them both closer. "Complete." And there, in their greenhouse sanctuary, surrounded by coffee gardens and science projects, by old memories and new dreams, by love that had learned to grow in every direction, they were exactly that: complete, connected, family. A testament to love's ultimate truth, that it never truly ends. It only transforms, growing new blooms from ancient roots, turning loss into legacy, and proving that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in unexpected places. All you need is the courage to plant new seeds. the patience to watch them grow, and the wisdom to know that love, like their coffee gardens, only multiplies when shared, forever growing, forever blooming, forever family. The end. If you were in Ilara's shoes, how would you deal with the fear of loving again after such a deep loss? What do you find more difficult, honoring the memory of a past love or having the courage to open your heart to a new love? Anthony, in his childlike innocence, taught us that the heart has room for different kinds of love. Do you agree that it is possible to love again without diminishing the significance of a previous love? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.